Go. Thank you. Welcome everybody to this hybrid discussion we're going to have today. My name is Ashok Krishnamurthy, and I'm the director of the Renaissance Computing Institute, most commonly called RENCI. And we have a couple of events around University Research Week this week, and this is one of the events we are having. I wanted to start by giving you a couple of little housekeeping things. One is that we have disabled a Zoom chat for everybody on Zoom, just so the presenters can talk about what they're going to do. We will open up the Zoom Q&A at the end of the panel discussion. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to start off by giving you a little bit of an introduction to RENCI. And we are a research institute that is housed in the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But we are somewhat unique in the sense that we have been around since 2004, but we are, by design from the beginning, work with not just UNC Chapel Hill and UNC Chapel Hill researchers, but also faculty and researchers at both Duke and NC State. For the last 10 plus years, we have had a focus on data science, now growing into a focus on AI also, along with data science. You can see some of the application areas that we focus on right at the top: life sciences, environmental sciences, social sciences. And we partner with other universities as well as industry to do what we do. Next slide, please. Again, what does RENCI do well? I think that it's basically there at the bottom. We are excellent at interdisciplinary collaboration. We work across disciplines. We work with people in multiple places. We are good at building large national communities. We create innovative technology and deploy innovative technology, and we are really a people-centric organization. Slide, please. As you can see, this is more, since today's discussion is about a particular visualization product that's called APSViz and how that's used for hurricane prediction and can influence policy decisions. We're going to focus on one of RENCI's research groups. That's the Earth Data Science Group. The Earth Data Science Group focuses on decision support for critical areas like climate, weather, natural hazards, and environmental health. They work in data science, team science, knowledge management, and how that can be used to address complex issues in coastal hazards, environment and health, and geo-related social technical spaces. They have expertise in software engineering, geospatial analysis, machine learning, ocean modeling, and remote sensing. Go on to now introduce the panelists, if you will. Okay. We're going to have three panelists, two of which are here in person, and one is going to be joining us on Zoom. I want to start off by introducing Dr. Blanton. Dr. Blanton has been with RENCI for a number of years. He's the director of the Earth Data Science Group that I mentioned. He's an oceanographer by training, but he works across many aspects of climate and Earth data science. In particular, he is an expert in modeling tides, storm surge, and wind wave using the ADCIRC computational model, which is also done. The lead for that is also a UNC professor recruiting that we work with closely. So Brian has been key to leadership of the Earth data science effort at RENCI. The next panelist is Dr. Cassandra Davis, who's right here. Dr. Davis is an assistant professor in the Department of Public Policy at UNC. Her research focuses on environmental disruptions to the schooling communities, especially the impact of natural disasters on low-income communities of color. Dr. Davis's goal is to support educators, community leaders, and policymakers to improve mitigation strategies, preparedness, response, and recovery in the areas of the highest need. The third panelist, who's on Zoom, and hopefully you'll see him when he gets to speak, is Dr. Evan Johnson. He is a research assistant professor also in the Department of Public Policy. Dr. Johnson's research focuses on innovation in public policy with specific focus on areas like energy innovation, climate civilization, and the impact of federal R&D on high-tech firms. So I'd like to turn it over to Brian and Cassandra to start their presentation.
Great. Thank you, Ashok. I'm going to just kick this off with a couple of sort of motivational slides. And then turn it over to Cassandra to fill in a lot of the very critical details and about where this came from and where we might go. I want to point out one thing. The title was how APSViz powers hurricane prediction and policy decision, which is true. I mean, that's certainly something that we work really hard at. Less so about hurricane prediction and more about the consequences of hurricanes and predicting those consequences, things like damage or, winds and storm surge. But the true title or the underlying title is strengthening alliances for future emergencies, and that's a phrase for SAFE, and we'll talk about what SAFE actually is. But this is really the key because this is a collaboration, more of a collaboration talk than it is, I would say, research or science talk. So it's really important, I think, to recognize that. And so next slide, please. We'll just kind of step through here. And I want to acknowledge a lot of other people that work on this project or concept rather, both at RENCI, the EDS group, public policy, and certainly the Center for Natural Hazards Resilience, which if you're not in the know, and I wasn't until yesterday, this is the overarching UNC center that housed the Coastal Resilience Center. And so Rick Ludig was the PI of that, and he's the director of that center. We had our first inaugural meeting yesterday after 15 years of existence, but that's beside the point. Anyway, next slide, please. So, I mean, hurricanes are kind of our focus, at least in terms of the things that come to mind when you think about, natural hazards and disasters, certainly in the Southeast. And, clearly they cause an enormous amount of damage. And Helene was remarkable in a number of ways, not only just the damage level, but the fact that it was not an East Coast hurricane and yet did really the largest amount of damage in North Carolina, certainly in the last several decades. Just an example of all the billion-dollar plus weather events in the nation. Certainly down in the Southeast, you can see several, including hurricane, but it's a massive, massive problem. And just in terms of disaster management, the real consequences of disasters are not necessarily the day the hurricane makes landfall or even the week. It takes years to recover from these events, and not only from infrastructure, but also just from health and sort of life expectancy aspects. So anyway, that's really one of the things we motivates us is to think about these and how we can do better at predicting them and potentially helping with the consequences afterwards. Next slide. So disaster management, I mean, this is not a presentation about disaster management, but I think it's important to think about what happens when disasters occur. You have to manage them, and who's doing the managing is, can be local, state, federal, NGOs. And really there's sort of 4 phases to this. Beforehand, you really think about mitigation and preparedness, and after the fact, you think about recovery and response. And I'm thinking typically in the recovery and response aspect of the problem, although that's, all 4 of these are arguably very important. And one could argue that preparedness is more important than anything if you can actually, again, get communities to make improvements in their infrastructure or whatever is really at risk. But the next slide says that, so decisions, I mean, really the issue to me is that decision makers need information. And in many cases, they don't really care how they get it as long as there's some sort of, verifiable or certifiable, bona fide to the data itself. Decisions are made at multiple levels, from individuals to organizations across many, many different, both spatial and temporal scales, really. But information is the foundation for the decision making. You could roll the dice and take your chances, but in some sense, that's not really decision making. That's just picking one randomly. And so, this is risk assessment is really the big thing. Even if you don't know you're doing risk assessment, at the end of the day, that's really what you're doing if you're making some sort of decision that is influenced by sort of external factors. Resource allocation and distribution is really a big one. FEMA spends a lot of time thinking about, before an event, before a hurricane makes landfall, where can they best position resources for recovery and response. And then after the fact, if they're not in the right place, they need to be able to get those resources to the right places. Real-time events, this is not so much real-time events, meaning the hurricane is making landfall. By the time that happens or that's occurring, your mitigation and preparation at this point is sort of frozen in time, right? You can't do much as the hurricane's barreling down on you to be better prepared. You're either prepared at that point or not. So really, that time constraint or that real-time event imposes a lot of constraints on how quickly you can generate information, how quickly you can synthesize it, and how quickly you can get it out the door. You can think of the weather forecasting cycle as being an example of how information is really most valuable maybe 6 hours after you've actually published a forecast, because 6 hours later, you get a new forecast. And so in some sense, data or information for decision making that's late or is kind of contemporary or temporary, in a time sense, out of phase with what people need, that information is kind of useless at that point. And most decision makers really don't want to know the core details of how you got there. They simply want to know an assessment or information that they can take into their own decision-making frameworks. This is just, this is a company, Aramco is a company in Texas that does storm protection. And I just found this not funny, but sort of illuminating that, pre and post Harvey, it was underwater, literally. And so only to say that even the best sources for storm protection are not necessarily protected. Next slide. The column on the left is the same, but on the right-hand side, before a disaster, one might ask, well, what does the future look like? By that, one is thinking, whether again it's the individual or the organization, is thinking, well, how might I be impacted by this event, and particularly, am I at risk? And if I'm at risk, risk is never zero, right? So the question is, how large is the risk? And given that that assessment of risk, what should I do? Should I evacuate? Should I, move furniture? And maybe more importantly, where are things like evacuation routes and shelters? And after the disaster, one might say, well, where are the streets flooded? Are they impassable? Can I even get back home or to wherever I need to go? And then what organizations are available in position to help, whether or not that is at the individual level, community level, or even larger. And that's the question that I think is important that we're focusing on specifically. And in the next slide, we'll ask the following question. Can we build a tool that brings together these various aspects of disaster management, from forecasts and information to large data sets and even analytics, to help address some of these needs during natural disasters? But why would we even ask this question? Because surely something like this exists. And I'm thinking specifically about the situation, I'm going to pick coastal North Carolina, during coastal emergencies or disasters, and where resources are deployed by some agent, whether again it's federal, whether or not it's federal or otherwise. And do these tools exist? Is there a tool that helps them manage this conceptual problem? Maybe FEMA's got one. They've got flood insurance rate maps. They've got damage assessment tools. So surely something like this exists. So just click once. No, not really. It turns out, and I learned this from Cassandra, that it turns out that much of this resource question is actually handled on the ground, on the fly, with cell phones. And so people literally calling other people to figure out how to manage getting resources around. And we kind of thought the next little click here, well, we can probably build something that would help with managing this problem. So one click on the slide. And that's where SAFE comes in. So in the first slide, I mentioned that strengthening alliances for future emergencies. So SAFE is a prototype dashboard for, I've called it NGO resource discovery, but really I think of it in my head as matchmaking, right? There's a need and there's a resource. First off, you got to identify both. Then you got to ultimately figure out how they can get together to do something positive. So I think that's kind of my thoughts as to how we got here. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Cassandra to pick up the interesting part about the collaboration and some of the details of the work itself. So on the next slide.
So thank you so much for inviting me here and your offices. It's really great to be here. Just something to mention that really the importance of having this transdiscipline or interdiscipline group that we're able to work together. Oftentimes I would see Brian, we would be kind of zooming past each other, and he would be talking about waters and different levels and things that are not people related. Meanwhile, as a social scientist, I delve into the people. So really this dashboard came about in partnership and bringing kind of the two brains and other brains together. But it originally started with one of the questions that was asked earlier: how are people recovering and responding or able to recover after an event? For about 3 years, just leading a team with Drs. Evan Johnson, who I believe is on this call, Dr. Simona Golden, and we conducted a series of focus groups with individuals from across the nation about these topics. We then administered surveys to targeted groups across the nation, and then we spread that out to just NGOs in general. And what we found is we're still missing a key important piece of information. And so by combining our perspective, the social scientist, the technology, the earth data science, we were able to sit down and come up with a potential plan on how to address this. This, as Brian mentioned earlier, about 1.5 years ago, we went to FEMA headquarters and we asked them, hey, we have all of this information, but how are you all, given when an event happens, how are you able to contact relevant sites and NGOs on the ground to support? And what we found was, which is kind of what we suspected, that the people who were deployed were pulling out their cell phones. I made a reference of white pages, which I felt really dated myself in that conversation. But they're pulling out their cell phones and they were Googling what would be the nearest NGO. And we thought surely there could be an easier process to this. So with this dashboard, next slide, please. We realized we had a slew of NGO data that had been pulled from tax information. There's about 1.7 million points that we have. And so we wanted to know if we could simultaneously map the NGOs, where they are and location, and then also overlay that with information that we pulled from Brian's team. So looking at when an event happens, where do we see flooding? What NGOs are in that area? Could we then provide more of a pinpoint accuracy in terms of what places of support would be best poised to provide support to the communities? The image at the bottom of the screen, this is again specifically looking at NGOs in the state across North Carolina. You see that the lighter color references that there are a larger count of NGOs, and the darker count represents that there is an absence. of NGOs. And again, these are NGOs identified by completing their tax form upon starting. And so as you would suspect, in metropolitan areas, we see that there are more NGOs. But then we also see these pockets of places where they're not there. Why this is important is that we can see what just by looking and referencing this map, we can identify the places that may have the best place, the best NGOs that are poised to support the communities that may be off the grid. This is especially important as we're thinking about Hurricane Helene, when conversations at the state and federal level were unable and unaware, didn't know who was in certain places within the rural part of our state. Please, next time. This is a prototype of the dashboard. And this provides kind of, again, overlaying, as I mentioned earlier, water levels. And to the left, you see, I have my glasses on to help me, but it's not doing anything. But to the left, you see the names of the different NGOs that are specifically targeted to certain groups. So a great thing about this is that within our data set, we can tell which NGOs might have an interest towards working with animals shelters. We can tell which NGOs are connected to elderly populations. And at the same time, we can tell which NGOs are positioned to be supporting children. And so with that, we could pinpoint the types of supports relative to the environment and the places that they have been impacted. Next slide, please. The team also thought that, especially as agents and people who were deployed, not just FEMA, also thinking about NOAA and also state level agents, that as their use and their cell phone, we thought that it would be imperative to have this information that is downloadable and easy to access on a cell phone. So the image to the left is something that you would see. Again, these are just prototypes, something you would see on your laptop. The image to the right would be a way to be able to look at this on your cell phones, since we found that most people were using their devices in spaces that they were kind of unknown. Next slide. And so this is just kind of in playing with the information and really looking at what information we're gathering. These were some questions that really came up as we were thinking about, as we were surveying our NGOs and as we were abstracting information from websites. We learned what type of online presence did NGOs have. And so this is just an image that shows the locations and thank you. Shows the extent that the NGO has either no online presence, if they have a social only, so like social media only, if they have a web and social, and then only a web only. This is really important as we're thinking about expanding the dashboard in terms of what are some other great information we can gather. Prime example, let's say that you are, and I believe this is the next slide, but I don't want to, yes. Prime example, if you are going into, if a number of agents were going to be deployed into a particular county, and we see through our dashboard and also through the knowledge of that county, we know that there are 1,000 NGOs that are in that space. By combing through social media accounts, something that we found, we can identify which NGOs are actually talking about the event. And so that information would be beneficial because it would allow individuals to know, instead of addressing all 1,000 NGOs, based on the social media data that we're able to abstract, we know that maybe 10 of them are actively communicating with their communities and saying information about a disaster. So with that information, we would then be able to provide deployed agents and individuals easy information as to, it comes to a point of, do I contact 1,000 individuals to, here are the top 10 NGOs that are most connected to the event, that are connected to their communities, and we're getting this from social media interactions. These are kind of some quick examples that we found. This is after Tropical Storm Ophelia, based on information that a few NGOs in the area, really on the Eastern Coast, were plopping on their websites. So yeah, the dashboard can offer the opportunity to not only identify NGOs, identify what types of supports of those NGOs are provided, but also gives us the opportunity to see which ones are talking about the event, who could be best positioned to support the communities that they serve.
Okay, well, I think that's my cue. This is going a little quicker than we thought it would, but that's okay. So then I want to point out one thing about the previous 4 or 5 slides that focused on Hurricane Ophelia, which was a number of 5 or so years ago. That's just an example. That's just using data that we've got that we can inject into this system. And then the real key, I think, is to turn this into a real-time sort of analytical process. And so that's where the APSViz aspect comes in, because APSViz is managing the ADCIRC model for us. It's a big piece of software that manages it and does data management, data archiving, and it operates in real time. So when the Hurricane Center says, here's a new forecast for a hurricane, it marches off and it does its thing, and it generates a lot of data. And then the key then is to take that data, which would be flood levels for coastal North Carolina during a particular hurricane, and then kick off an engine of some process that can synthesize and basically come up with maybe even recommendations about how to do this NGO resource matchmaking in real time. Because it's one thing to do it retrospectively. You learn a lot about how to build the algorithm, but it's not a predictive tool at that point. So this example on the right-hand side is it's a little bit hard to see up here, but this is a chatbot that is actually it's real. This is not a mock-up, although it's not really, I would say, in production. But the idea is that if you had NGO data behind this, as well as a whole bunch of other maybe multi-hazard information, fire, tornado, things like that, you could ask the question, well, here's an event coming. Where are NGOs currently positioned that are categorized in a certain way, meaning they're serving maybe children versus pets or some other aspect, and come up with text-based recommendations about what some information that might be used in some decision making. I mean, this the APSViz presentation from a couple of years ago went into the gory details of how APSViz works. So and I'm sure everybody remembers that. But the truth is that it's a very good website for looking at that complex information. But in some cases, it takes a little bit of maybe pre-knowledge or expertise to really understand what that data means. So we're thinking about how do you build some sort of LLM-driven construct that really enables filtering that information and distilling it down into something that's a little bit more intuitive. And so this is actually, the question was asked, tell me about Lockwood Folly River. So that Lockwood Folly River is actually down here. And at the moment, there's no real weather out there that's of any concern. There is a little bit of a hurricane coming or a tropical system that might develop, but activity is very low. And so it just says, well, the water level's 2.8 feet. Okay, that doesn't really ring a bell or cause any alarm. But the idea would be, well, if it was at a flood level, again, and there are some assets that are at risk in that area, then this could be used to really quickly hone in on who is where and where the resource needs are and where the resources are for that matter, and then maybe come up with a communication method that would really accelerate the response and recovery process. So, we're going to try to integrate this dashboard into APSViz, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe we stick with the dashboard that we have and figure out how to pump different data into it. Either way, we'll be able to leverage a pretty sophisticated data management platform that contains all of this real-time hazard data. I really want to extend it to multi-hazard. I don't know anything about fires or tornadoes, but they're real problems. Landslides are another one. And certainly get beyond North Carolina and start thinking about regional, Southeast versus Gulf of Mexico. A very long range vision is that it's all hazard, all scale, which, would be tremendous. But it would involve quite a lot of data management and thinking about how to organize all that. The key thing I think is, we want to leverage LLMs where we can, and we're working on some of that, particularly the social media content mining aspects and how that might be pulled in with a lot of the real-time hazard data. The current chat example we see here is actually built with Facebook's AI libraries, and it's running in an Azure cloud instance. So, I think that's a pretty good step forward, and we'll see how far we can get. So I think that's the extent of our slides. The next slide is just a little bit of contact information. The previous APSViz talk is a YouTube link there. And then the three of us panelists have some email addresses there, which are available in many different ways. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So maybe transition now to the panel discussion. Is that okay? So I have a couple of questions that I wanted to start off before opening it up to the audience. One of the here's a question is that I think came in the chat perhaps, and I think this is mainly aimed at you, Brian, but Cassandra, feel free to answer. How can researchers from other UNC departments integrate their data or models with APSViz or other tools from the Earth Data Science team? And what resources did RENCI provide to facilitate these interactions?
So the answer to the first question is, we think that we've built an infrastructure that can handle all sorts of different data. I mean, at the end of the day, so this is big data, but it's not big data in the Wikidata sense. It's not a whole bunch of unstructured, kind of text-based data. Most of this is numerical data, and so we have a pretty good handle on how to deal with that. I think we can work on bringing in other model output. It's pretty straightforward to get different models into the system. So you could have a wildfire model in this system. You could have a tornado model into the system, as long as we understood how the data, needs to get moved about and transferred. We've actually taken some of NOAA's operational model data and gotten it into APSViz, just as an example from a weather model, for example. So I think the second question, is important because this does take some CPU or horsepower to run from the APSViz side. ADCIRC takes CPU resources to run, and we typically use RENCI's internal assets to be able to do that. And certainly from a person standpoint, we have a group of people at RENCI, throughout RENCI, that can really add expertise to any of the difficult parts of this whole process. So, I think it's hard to imagine this happening at places that are not like RENCI, because it is so fundamentally interdisciplinary. I mean, I know nothing about AI and LLMs, and so, but there's a lot of people here that do, and that's really what will ultimately make this successful, particularly when we can work with other groups and centers on campus who have the domain knowledge of something like public policy or other aspects of health information, for example. I mean, the idea of health information or health informatics, public policy, and hazards coming together is a really interesting idea, because they're all related, and nothing, and they're all going to be even more impactful, if you will, as climate things kind of evolve.
Thank you, Kay. I'm going to this is specific to APSViz, but I'm going to generalize that a little bit and talk about the SAFE dashboard, right? So maybe this is passing this to you, Cassandra and Evan. The SAFE APSViz is a component of SAFE, but I think your vision is that SAFE is much broader than that and much more informative. How can people work if they want to now be able to display that data through SAFE or provide information through SAFE as it evolves? I believe it's just starting out. Am I correct? That SAFE is just as that grows and evolves. How can people get involved in that?
Well, in some sense, it's the same answer as the previous one in that, what we would need to figure out is how you participate in the system. I mean, I could envision a dashboard in the cloud where people upload their own data, right? Maybe they've got their own, NGO data or some other type, and they want to run, some sort of staged or pre-canned analytics to say, well, help me filter this information and come up with some distillation that allows me to make a decision. The process for doing that, I'm not sure of, but I mean, conceptually, it's a data problem and a data management and wrangling and knowledge problem more than I think a technical problem.
There's another question. Beyond coastal hazards forecasting, what are the types of environmental or social science challenges could benefit from RENCI's data science and visualization capabilities? And are there examples of other cross-campus collaborations we can learn from? So I'm going to take an attempt at answering that because it's more RENCI centric. There are a number of, we work across campus all the time in a number of different areas. Something that is related to what Brian was saying and what is also related to health and environment is one of the projects we did a while ago was to actually integrate environmental data as well as social determinants of health data with electronic health record data from UNC Health to be able to provide a comprehensive picture of where different diseases may be more prevalent and if there are environmental causes that you could possibly associate with those, for example, right? So that's an example of a project that we did successfully several years ago. The project still exists, and we continue to work on that. Okay. There's one other question I want to ask. So when you're Brian, you're creating the data systems that are able to influence policy, right? Ultimately, if you want to be able to have resources and policy, this has to be communicated back typically to somebody in say some governmental agency or even an NGO, but certainly government. And some of these concepts may involve uncertainties or how easy is it to convey this notion of risk bands and probabilistic things at that level, so people who can actually create policy can do something.
I would say in my conversations, when we started talking about dreaming up the dash, it was easy to understand. There is a clear gap, and different agencies at the federal level, at the state level, were excited and are excited to hop on because they recognize really being blind when an event happens, and especially going into an area that you have little to no relationship to. So I don't mind this at all. I am a people person, so I don't mind having these conversations, helping to kind of talk about the process. I think I don't know how to give the different advice, but I would just say that is not an issue for the dash. I think the struggle that we have encountered is, to be very frank and honest, is the financial support to get the dash in a position that it can be incredibly effective. We continue to have talks with representatives from other states that said that this dash would be essential and very helpful in their movements, especially as they're thinking of disasters, not necessarily with hurricanes or tropical storms, but fires, flooding, and tornadoes. But it's a matter of finding available resources to allow us to build it so that it can be implemented. So again, I don't think that for this dashboard, it's a difficult sell for the policy folks or a difficult sell for the emergency folks. I think our hurdle in this instance is ensuring that we have funding to support it.
Yeah, so they would be happy to use it if it exists, but not clear that they necessarily have the funding to be able to help us create it.
Right. I think if they could and did have the money, they would.
Yes.
But the situation, at least at the federal level, has become, a little bit hard to squeeze the money.
Yeah, makes sense. 2 minutes in the audience Q&A. Okay, I mean, we can go to audience Q&A right now, but I wanted to give Evan a chance to comment on any of the things that we have heard so far. Evan, so.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So sorry not to be able to be there in person. This is a fascinating discussion and happy to be talking about this work. All I would say is, just to sort of build on what Cassandra just said about the funding, there are ways to sort of build out pilots, and we've done that in the past. There are different tiers of kind of completeness, of course. And so for the most part, that's focused on specific geographic jurisdictions, but also in terms of the layers of the data themselves. So for certain things, we can execute more quickly with a lower amount of resources. I'll say just from a computational standpoint, what does require a lot of additional resources that I think we were hoping to get from entities like FEMA and other state level agencies, that's currently out of the question. But the computational resources required are for scraping massive amounts of archival web data, right? So that's where a lot of this comes from, is we have an NGO or an organization, we measure their digital footprint of providing assistance. So that is what requires a lot of heavy lifting, just in terms of web scraping and computational capacity.
Thank you, Evan. Transition to audience Q&A, and Amanda, will you take that over from? No?
Sure. The first question is, since time is of essence in disaster management, how do you envision integrating social media data regarding NGOs in real time?
And I think that's to the point that my colleague Evan mentioned. It takes a lot of power from the different devices in order to analyze the data. But recently, I believe when we had, and Evan, please correct me if I'm wrong, when we presented on provided data to FEMA on Tropical Storm Ophelia, and was able to look at social media posts, it was within a 2-week span. And again, these are for targeted areas. So we know that as we were trying new things, when we first did this process took about 4 months. And then it went down to about a month, and then we were able to get it down to a couple of weeks. The assumption is, as we're working out our own kinks, that process would go much faster, but absolutely in agreement with the faster that you know information, the better that the folks on the ground are able to provide the resources. So ideally, the hope would be, as soon as as soon as possible, and not months after an event.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. Initially, I think the ideal is we envision this as a bi-directional data pipeline, where one direction is we're looking back and saying in real time, well, here are the organizations that are most likely to be able to provide support based on what they've done in the past. That's one view, but that's not sufficient, of course. So we want to also be able to say in real time, here is the information we're getting from these social media and web outlets that are talking about who's providing resources, what they're doing, and where they're located. That's, again, the more expensive piece that requires a much more advanced data pipeline, but we'd like to have a little bit, both, a combination of both those resources.
All right. Next question. The author apologizes in case they missed it, but is there environmental hazard historical data being utilized in model building? Or how can this be used for more disaster predictive applications?
Well, I think the idea is that we have a fairly large archive of historical events that we can use to build or vet or verify and validate a process that would have the relevant social media data, for example, for that time period, and then be able to, since we, in some sense, know what happened after a historical event, that's how you ground truth the model. And that's true when we do a storm surge model. It's true when you do some sort of NGO resource prediction model. You have to be able to ground truth that on historical data. So we have a lot of that data, whether or not it's weather or climate or ocean. And there's also, again, the Wayback, and in fact, Evan has worked quite a lot with the Wayback machine to go back and look at sort of the historical state of the web, if you will, to do exactly that sort of retrospective or hindcasting problem, if you will. So then once you've sort of come to grips with that and you have a model that you think has some predictive skill, well, then you can more comfortably, sort of use it in a forward-looking forecast. So, that's kind of the way that most models should get built. And certainly that would be I think the goal, again, to train the models with historical inputs and outputs, and then use them in the future.
There's a question. Can we go there?
I was just wondering, the idea of having a dashboard seems right. And in some way, the decision maker is here, you want to give them the information. Is there a role for something more active? So could you imagine, for instance, I don't know, an agent does all of that, picking the 10 NGOs that should be contacted and does the contacting, or says, here, put your information in this thing and that will go straight to FEMA or whoever. Is there something that can be done to get it off of people's phones and start hooking things together in the back end?
I think the answer is yes. Because once again, if somebody's asked the question and then delivering them the answer shouldn't be the bottleneck. The format, notwithstanding. So I think it'd be great to, the slight danger is that, regardless of the model, you have to have eyes on it. You have to have human eyes on it. And so, as well known as the physics are for storm surge physics and the models that do the predictions, we never let a solution out the door during an event without having looked at it, because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Models are occasionally wrong, even good ones. And so
sometimes and then occasionally.
So I think there's a little bit of I think this is actually a fundamental model question and problem, more so than any specific example. As you've talked about before, Chris, LLMs can be dead wrong, and so
Absolutely.
you can't let go, I think, of the need for human interaction. When the Hurricane Center publishes a hurricane prediction, there is a signature at the bottom that says who the forecaster was that approved or validated the prediction. There has to be a human in that loop, and I just don't see any comfortable way of ever getting around it. Yeah.
And I also, do you want to?
No, please. I have another question with it.
I'll also say that based on the information that we're pulling about NGOs is coming from their tax forms. So if there is their contact email, now that's not to say that that might not go to the person who you wanted, but there will be a way to connect. If you're pulling up that NGO, you're pulling up information about it, that contact information should be there in order to connect the person. I know in our conversations that we had back in January, I'm trying to think back almost a year ago, the sense was that we would actually take it a step further, that after an event would happen, we have now a little bit of what Evan was saying. Now that we've identified, these 10 NGOs have been identified, these 10 NGOs have been contacted, that there is another bit of data through interviews or through surveys of information that we can collect for them to get a sense of what are the reasons of why that they're standing out? Like why are they the ones that are rising to the top, and which groups are being missed in order to hopefully increase that number from 10 to 15. So there's a lot of things and directions that we can go with just this. I don't want to say just this, but with this dashboard, it allows us to look at opportunities to not only look backwards, but even to look forward to ensure that the process is better.
Yeah, and I'll say that the dashboard is the visual outlook of the data. It's not, I mean, the key, right, is the model that's being developed and built to do this analysis, right? I mean, again, a dashboard is just a way of looking at it, but if you don't have an easy way of looking at it in some cases, I mean, the data is obviously very hard to deal with.
The model and presumably the integration of the other data that you know about all the NGOs. All right. I guess, and just, sorry, one more kind of tweak on that question. Just from a, I don't know, system optimization point of view, right? You all are focusing on this kind of like, one part of the process, which looks very chaotic, right? Because it's a bunch of people on their phones. How well do you know that that's like the piece to focus on? Are there other parts of that process that are places where the dashboard could be useful?
And I think that that's what research and evaluation, like that's how you step in and figure out all those questions. We were able to pinpoint or identify that this is an issue, and this was based off of 3 to 4 years of collecting data, of focus groups, of surveys, of having meetings in DC, of having meetings at the state, and determining that this was an issue that we felt like we have the data that we could tackle. Presumably, I mean, that's why we're researchers. We love to find problems and we love to work to solve them. I'm sure that this would then, assuming that this goes up and running, that needs are being met, I'm certain that this will then find, well, what about the groups that don't submit tax forms, that are not NGOs? How are we able to get to those groups? Or what about I'm sure that this will highlight other holes, in which case we would then refocus and figure out, again, going back to the question, to the extent that communities are able to recover and receive support following a disaster. Sure.
One more?
We have time for one more question.
Please,
I have a great one in chat. Are you planning for SAFE to include road connectivity information as well? That could be useful in identifying and managing bottlenecks.
Well, so in the dashboard right now, there are evacuation route objects within it. What we don't have is any sort of traffic information coming in, and whether or not there's a bottleneck in a particular area. I mean, the coast of North Carolina is complicated in that sense, right? Because once you get far enough east, there's kind of only one way in and out. And so you have to be pretty careful with that. At the end of the day, there's a lot of people doing evacuation work and sort of optimizing, traffic flow. So we would, I think, and certainly on campus, that's true too, in terms of other research and activity. So I think we want to figure out how to embrace and incorporate that as opposed to do something different. But the truth is that that requires another model. Right. So really, at the end of the day, it's an accumulation of models, and then making sure that they're flowing together properly, and that the data is being integrated intelligently, I think is the hard part. But I mean, evacuation models and traffic flow models exist all over the place, so it could be interesting. One of the things we have to be slightly careful about is making a forecast, right? We can't, in the hurricane scenario, we don't call the publication of our APSViz output a forecast. We call it additional information. Because we don't want to be seen as contradicting the federal guidance, right? Because that's the Hurricane Center's job. And so we want to be very careful about that. So really, that's why I think of it as information for decision making as opposed to forecasting. I mean, that's a little bit of a distinction, but it's kind of important. We have to be careful about that kind of wording. So we're not ever going to say, for example, we think you should evacuate, and this is the route. We're never ever going to say that. That's just not our level of responsibility, but also acknowledged expertise.
It's a liability.
And well, I mean, that's the truth of the matter. It's a
First thing
liability.
that popped to mind.
No, I wasn't going to say that. I should have. Yeah.
I mean, okay. So thank you so much for joining us today. And if we didn't get to your question, hopefully you can reach directly out to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you, Evan, Cassandra, Brian, for really interesting discussion. I want to point out that we have one more Research Week event from RENCI tomorrow at 9 a.m. It's titled AI-Powered Solutions for Scientific Discoveries, where we are going to have some researchers that will showcase scalable, real-world AI solutions to drive innovation in biomedical research, infrastructure safety, and workflow management. That panel will have David Borland, Kathleen Carter, and Anirban Mandal, who are all from RENCI, and it'll be moderated by Becky Boyles, who's sitting right next to me here, Deputy Director at RENCI. Again, if you want to have any more interactions with our panelists, reach out through the Contact Us form. If you are attending by Zoom, you'll get an eval form that's going to jump up as soon as you're done, pop up right after this webinar is done or this panel is done. And if not, you will, if you're attending in person, you will get an email. And if you want to know more about what RENCI does, please reach out by email and follow our many social media outlets. It is wonderfully managed by Jayashree right here. Okay. Thank you all.